It is August the 13th, and we are just feeding bees pretty much this time of year. We're going to go over what we're going to do through the rest of this month, kind of check back on what we've done over the last month. It is August the 13th. Yesterday we had Hurricane Francis move through our area, and we are still getting the remnants and outer bands of that hurricane over the next day or two. So you can see the sky around this. We're getting some rain off and on today and tomorrow. Bees are pretty angry, pretty hard to work with today, but we're gonna make it happen. Can't wait on the weather. But I'm gonna talk a little bit about how we're feeding. We are coming up on, within days, within the week, we'll have a good goldenrod flow going. Or we'll have a goldenrod bloom. Yet to see how the flow is going to be, but with this rain, I think we'll have a good flow, hopefully. That will affect how we feed the bees over the next month. A good goldenrod flow will save us a lot of money on sugar, for sure. So hopefully we'll have that. We've got our splits that we made since we poured our honey supers off. Made splits above these double screen boards, and we're going to check on the remainder of those and see if they're queenright and remove them if not. And just kind of go through that, how we are finishing up with our hives and just preparing by feeding, preparing for winter. There's a few little things that I'll talk about as far as condensing hives where needed, and what we'll do with any weak hives that we find. But other than that, just gonna kind of just go in a few of these hives and check some of these. I don't see any here. Actually, I think I got some in the yard below us, some the splits above double screen board, and we're gonna go in those and check those to be queenright. But other than that, we have had a couple of yards that, if you watched earlier in this series, that when we pulled our honey supers off, we kept the queen excluders in place and put a deep that had been extracted out above double screen boards, just like this here. This has got when we pulled our honey supers off, it had one deep, bottom deep here. One single deep was a brood box. Had a queen excluder, had a second deep that we used through the springtime that wound up being just another honey super, and then had our medium honey supers above that. And we pulled all these off down to the queen excluder, and put these back on after we extracted honey to come right back and make splits through the summertime, early fall. But this yard and had one more yard, had a couple of yards that I didn't get to making splits. Just didn't get around to being able to do it. So I will go through and pull these excluders off of these. They are stored up with honey, I'm assuming. We'll look and see, but they should have a good bit of honey in these top boxes once again. So I'm not going to pull them off. I typically go down to one single deep for winter. These couple of yards that I left the excluders on, since they've established a good bit of honey above that excluder by this point, I'm just going to remove the excluder and leave those as double deeps. Keep from having to do something with those boxes of honey. We come back and start in the springtime, we add a second deep on for the bees to expand into. So these we won't have to do that. They'll already have a second deep. We'll just leave them that way and leave them with that box full of food above them through the winter time. It sure won't hurt. So that's how we'll handle that situation. This is one of those hives that we've left an excluder on, but it is a little bit weaker in population than a lot of these other hives. I'm gonna check food stores in it. It's got a little in the top, a couple of frames, looks like. Well, where'd my hive tool go? And drop my hive tool. There's a full frame of honey. It looks like that's about it. About a frame and a half. That's not enough, especially with Goldenrod about to come on. I'm not going to leave that as a second box on top. You know, depending on what I find in the bottom. If I open it up and there is, let me spin this around. If I open it up and find, you know, a lot of brood in this bottom box and just a frame or two of honey, then I might go ahead and leave that top box, let them store it up good through the fall, through the goldenrod flow. You know, I just kind of play it by ear. You have to evaluate each hive as you go. Situations are always different. But if she's got a good brood nest in the bottom, I'll leave that brood nest open there, and that way I don't condense them down. I think there's pretty heavy population in that bottom box, so it's not like that they can't defend that top box. If there was a weak population in the bottom hive, just 2-3 frames of bees, then I would definitely take that top box off and condense them down to one box. But I can see bees looks like on every frame in the bottom, so I'm assuming there's going to be a good brood nest. If there is a good sized brood nest and there's only a couple frames of honey, I'll just go and leave that top and give them some room to store it up. And for one, I don't have to take that box off and protect it. Our storage container is just about full of boxes anyway, so I'm going to leave the rest of these boxes on if I can. Yeah, this hive's a lot weaker than I thought. That's why that top box is not filled any more than it is. See, there's only this hive had probably swarmed late in the honey flow, probably. But it's got about 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 to 6 frames of bees, 5.5 frames of bees in it. So I will condense them down. I see plenty of empty frames on the outside that they can store into. Yeah, these are empty, so they do have room to store their nectar through this goldenrod flow. There's a frame of nectar there, a frame of honey. I see plenty of honey around the top bands of these brood frames also. See, these are brood frames here. Looks like probably 3 or 4 frames of brood here. Maybe 3 frames of brood. Honey bands across the top of those. They do have plenty of honey in there to live right now, to make it until this goldenrod flow kicks off. We have been feeding a little bit. So what I'll do, I'll probably take the honey frames that I got in there, a couple of honey frames. I will pull these outside frames, especially this one frame here that's not drawn. It's not drawn out. I'll remove it for sure. And I will put that full honey frame against the wall here. And probably that other honey frame over here. I'll pick the frame that's drawn out least, which is probably this one. I'll put those frames of honey against the wall. They got a couple more frames to fill up. And as the fall goes on, they will raise brood good for the next month or so through the fall flow. and then they will start to shrink that brood nest down and backfill in more frames away from the wall towards the center of that hive. There's a full frame of honey. Move it all the way to the outside. That'll give that queen a little more room to expand that brood nest out if she needs to. I'll let them work in through that brood nest as they desire. I won't push the honey frames on in further in to restrict her from laying. So that's I condense that down to one hive like that. That's one thing I'm doing right now as I going through yards. One thing that I am doing is I'm checking each hive to be queenright and seeing what kind of shape that they're in. If a hive that may have been a double brood box hive, 2 deep boxes, if possible, I'm going to condense that down to one brood box. I'm going to overwinter that in a single. If there's any way to condense it, if I had a lot of honey frames in that top, like I said a while ago, I will leave it in place just because they have all those stores. But otherwise, I'm going to condense it down to one box if possible, and that's much better than trying to overwinter a colony that's smaller than one box of bees in a double box, because they don't need that extra room through the winter time. They're worse off trying to defend that and trying to keep those 2 boxes heated up with a smaller cluster than having that one box. Is much easier to defend from pests here in the fall, and also easier to keep that smaller box warmed by that smaller cluster of bees. So anytime I get the chance to condense a double deep hive, I will do that. But also, like I said, I'm checking for queenright in all of the colonies also. Any hives that I find that's just really weak, that I feel like it's too weak to make it through the winter time, I will say, most of the time it's going to be a queen that's just failing, probably an older queen most of the time, and she may have two frames of bees right now. Anything like that I find, she would build up a little more through this fall flow and look better, but at some point over the winter or early spring, she's gonna either quit laying or not be able to lay enough to keep the hive going. So I know they're gonna die out. And you can kind of compare as you go through other hives, see what kind of shape your hives are on average. And when you come across a weaker hive, it kind of stands out. You'll be able to tell that queen is not keeping up. She's failing. Those hives, I will go ahead. They're going to die out, and especially if they do it in the fall while your wax moths and hive beetles are still prevalent. Still have a lot of those before it starts getting cold. They will ruin those combs if you don't quickly find it and remove that box and store it up. So to keep that from happening, keep the hive from dying out over the winter time or early spring, I'll go ahead and consider that a loss now. I'll just shake those bees out and go ahead and store that box up. And in the springtime, just make a split right back into that box and recover that hive. But it's better to go ahead and do that now. Store your frames up. Take good care of your frames, and instead of letting her just sit there and slowly die out. She's not going to produce anything. If you do pull her through the winter time into the springtime and try to salvage it, she's not gonna do anything. She's going to stay a small colony, not going to make any honey. So you're not gaining anything by trying to keep that hive alive. Go ahead and take that loss. It's too late in the year now to try to put a new queen in there and get it going. It's possible if you could get a mated queen, you could overwinter it, but I'm not going to fool with that. I'm not raising queens anymore, and you can't hardly get any queens if you wanted to right now. So shake the bees out, store it up. I'll make a split back in it into the springtime. A good young queen, middle of March, and that hive will will grow quickly and make us a honey crop next year. Here's an example of a double deep colony that still got the excluder between the two boxes, but it is pretty full of bees. And this is one that I will just remove the excluder on. And those top boxes is packed with honey. It's got, looks like 10 frames of honey in it. So I will definitely leave that for the bees. Just leave it in place and allow these bees to overwinter in a double deep box. All I'm going to do is remove the excluder and place this. I'll check the queen and make sure she's still in there at this point. Make sure she's got a let's look at her brood nest. Make sure she's got a good brood nest in there, and place this box of honey right back on top without the excluder, and they're ready to overwinter already. At this point, we don't have to fool with them anymore. We don't even have to look in this box. They're good to go. We can look at them next time, be in the late winter, early spring. As our fall flow is getting ready to begin, we are within the week of goldenrod starting to open their blooms. We have a good flow of pollen and nectar from goldenrod, and some other. There's a couple of other good fall plants we have, but nothing compares to the years we have a good goldenrod flow. We focus on our brood nest when that's happening primarily. The way that I operate, I fed a little building up to this fall flow, but once the fall flow starts, and it's kind of dependent on what you got in your yards. A typical hive that you went through the year with is going to have some weight on it, going to have some honey stored up on it, and you're not going to want to get that brood nest filled up with honey prior to your fall flow. During your fall flow, you're wanting to focus on that brood nest. You want to leave it open and give that hive room to lay, that queen room to lay, and build up the size of your colony. They go through a pretty good build up during that fall flow. And so if you're feeding prior to that, be sure that you don't just pack that hive out with honey or syrup prior to your fall flow, if you have one. Everybody don't have a fall flow, and you'll have to manage a little differently. Some people just have even with goldenrod, some people just have a pollen flow. Goldenrod don't make nectar everywhere. With that, I would feed some maybe 1-to-1 syrup pretty regular with buckets if I had buckets, but any other way that you have is sufficient. But buckets would work best to kind of regulate that flow over time through your fall flow. I would gradually feed through that fall flow and until the pollen stopped coming in, and then no matter where you're at, once your fall flow's over with, or within 3 weeks or so prior to your cold weather beginning, maybe your first frost date, I would say. Prior to that, you're gonna have to know what your hives has got. Kind of keep an eye in your hives, and as you're building up to the fall flow, going through the fall flow, and post fall flow, kind of have an idea of the average stores in them. Once that flow's over with, once that fall buildup is over with, and you're getting ready to go into cold weather, then you can, if needed, you can really feed them really heavy and quickly. I gradually feed through the fall flow and prior to that to keep the hive stimulated to lay and build their population as we go. I'm letting them gradually add weight on during that process slowly, but I primarily want to keep that brood going. And so that's the reason I like buckets so much, is you can, depending on how many holes is in that bucket, you can mimic a nectar flow and stimulate that queen to lay. But once that flow's over with, you're not worried about that anymore. You want to pour as much syrup into that hive as possible, and get them heavy quickly. So you can, at that point, feeding doesn't matter what you feed with. You can use an open feeder like this here. You can use buckets. Buckets is probably the worst thing to use at that time, because they don't pull it out as fast as they would an open feeder, or say a in-hive feeder like a captain ladder feeder or a hive top feeder. They can access that and get it as quickly as possible. Those are the best ways to go for really putting on weight quickly prior to your cold weather. Once that flow is over with, or once you get into, say, a month, three weeks to a month of your first frost date, is when you really start to pour that weight, or really get or start to prepare to get your hives ready to close up for winter for good. Go in and get a final assessment on that weight and see if they're heavy enough. Then close them up, and give them another feeding one more time if you desire, depending on what they've got. I will give you a reference for what I like to go by. It doesn't matter how much feed you get in them. You can get them to fill all those frames up before winter time, every frame they got, if that's what you want to do. Here in Alabama, in central Alabama, we have a winter where it's pretty warm through October, getting into, say, towards halfway to 3/4 through November. We still have warm weather, and we'll start having cold weather really set in good, and stay on average, stay what we would call cold from the end of November through December, January, and usually pretty steady through the first half of February, or so, first week or two of February. And then we will start to have some warm weather and then cold weather again, and kind of go back and forth for 3 or 4 weeks like that, until on up in towards the second or third week or so of March. So we have shorter winters than a lot of you have, so we don't have to have quite as much feed in the wintertime. We can also start to feed earlier in the springtime, which would actually be late winter. We can start to feed back. So stores is not as important as they would be for some of you that live in higher latitudes. But here in Alabama, for that period of time, and we'll finish feeding up first half of October and start back feeding the end of January. For that time period, on my single deep hives that I overwinter, I want to have a minimum of 4 frames of honey, and that is sufficient to get us through that time period. So that's a I know a lot of people wonders, whether I have enough feed on my hive or not. That's a big question usually of newer beekeepers. But that's a good reference that we go by. A good strong full box, 10 frame box of bees that may have 6 to 7 frames of bees in it going in the wintertime, maybe some more. But those 4 frames of honey is sufficient to get through that time period. So just reference that. If you have a winter that's longer, you may want to think about overwintering in a double deep with a majority of those frames stored up with honey, or either really feeding longer and faster before your cold weather, and try to get that single brood box. If you want to overwinter that way, get it filled up, get it full of honey with every frame that's in there, and that's just a good reference to base off of. Just be sure of what you got. Look in those hives good and feed accordingly until you get to a place that you feel comfortable there before your frost starts to hit. These splits that we have made over the late summer, early fall, we've put, when we make them up, we fed them a bucket of 1-to-1 syrup, and then came back and refilled the buckets after a couple of weeks. But each one of these splits has been fed. Most of them's been fed 3 rounds, so three gallons total. Some of them have only been fed 2, but they should be in good shape. Of course, we've done a little open feeding on the yards too, so they've had plenty of chance to get some syrup in these hives. But we'll go through now and check for queenright in these hives. I'm not as worried about the size of the population of bees. I'm simply going through checking to see if they're queenright or not. If they're not queenright, I'll pull the box with the split off, pull the double screen board off. If there's, if they've had a population of bees in here enough to store up some of that syrup, I'll probably just set that box back over, leave it as a double deep. If they died out, you'll have some die outs, the ones that didn't get queenright, and I'll just pull that box off. If it's empty, it's going to be robbed out anyway, and just take it and store it up as long as the wax moths hadn't already got to it. I try to check them after a month, because I did do walkaway splits on this round, so I gave them a month, maybe 5 weeks. Most of that time they would have had bees in them, so they shouldn't have got eaten up by wax moths yet. There may be some, but if they're not queenright, we're going to remove it and either place it back because of the stores that's in it, or take it and store it. But as far as the population goes, I'm not as worried about that, because they're above these double screen boards, and they're going to share that heat from that stronger colony below, so you can overwinter a really small cluster. I'll show you what this one looks like. This is I don't know if the light's good enough to see, but this is probably 1, 2, 3, 4, probably about 5 frames of bees in this hive. That's actually a really good split to overwinter. Above a double, if you overwintering above a double screen board, that's a really good population. Those will do really well. But there's a weaker one right here. We'll look at that population and I'll show you what it looks like. It's probably going to be a lot less bees than this, and that's fine. I'll overwinter a single frame of bees. If it's got a queen in it, I may even overwinter less than that on top of that double screen board, because they're able to stay warm, and that queen's able to lay a lot more than she would be otherwise if they were by themselves on a pallet. So as long as they got a queen, I'm going to leave them in place. I'm just going to go through. I'm going to pull out one frame. As typical, I'm going to go right over to the middle. I'm not really going to be looking. I may look in this one just to kind of get a good idea of what kind of stores they've got. But I know the rest of them is going to be the same way. And this has got plenty of food on it. Plenty of honey. And there's a lot of brood right there. I know there's a queen. I'm not going to find that queen. I know she's in there, because I just made this split. And I see multiple frames of brood. And there's 1, 2, 3 more frames of honey. About 4 frames of brood. That is in fantastic shape for a split made this time of year. We're fixing to come into the goldenrod flow, and man, that hive will build up awesome before our cold weather sets in. So that is a very successful split. Now, we have split at different times since the honey flow was over with. Of course, the earlier splits were made soon after the nectar flow was over with, and after we extracted honey and started making these splits. Those earliest ones should be stronger. The ones that were made, a lot later, towards the fall, they're going to be naturally be weaker. So, not really concerned about the size of the population in them. Just making sure we got a queen's all that I'm doing, and removing the box if they don't. Goldenrod here is almost ready to start putting out nectar. I'd say within the week we will have goldenrod nectar coming in. Most of these are still closed up. You can just barely see the yellow hue coming through the green bud. I don't know if I can get that to focus very well. A lot of them are a little bit further along. Started to open up. You can see this one here. It is just starting to open. Starting to turn pretty yellow. They'll be opened up in the next few days. We'll start to see see some yellow pollen coming in and some funky smelling nectar coming in. Last year I had a hive, had a yard, about, I don't know, probably 100 yards from the road that I drive in on. And I could, when the goldenrod flow, we had a good one last year. And this yard had a lot of goldenrod pollen. A lot of goldenrod plants there around that yard. And man, they was probably from the road there, about 100 yards, I could smell the smell of that nectar in the hives. That's how much fresh nectar they were bringing in. It smells like, you hear it smells like a sweaty sock, a nasty, stinky shoe, and that is what it smells like. So most of the time you don't even have to open the hive to see if there's nectar coming in when goldenrod's blooming. You go out in the yard, and if you smell some sweaty, stinky shoes, that's what it'll be. That'll give you confirmation that goldenrod started. But yeah, we are very, very close. This is a very, very important plant for us for overwintering our bees. Gets bees, when we have a good year, it gets bees in really, really good shape going into wintertime.